The slow death of the empath. How caring becomes collapse. They used to care. Deeply. Too deeply. They were the one who stayed on the phone for hours. The one who noticed your silence before you said a word. The one who forgave things even before you apologized. They showed up again and again and again until something inside of them, the thing that made them soft, the thing that made them stay, started to break. Not loudly, not with fireworks, but in silence, in exhaustion, in moments they didn't even notice themselves. The birth of collapse. It doesn't happen all at once. Caring doesn't stop like flipping a switch. It burns out like a candle trapped in wind. Each disappointment, each dismissive glance, each manipulation becomes a gust until one day they realize they don't have the energy to explain themselves anymore. They no longer want to fix what keeps breaking. They're tired of being the only one who gives a damn. This is where the danger begins. Not for them, but for the one who mistook their kindness for weakness. Why this happens? Psychological breakdown. According to psychology, empaths absorb emotions like sponges. They don't just see your pain. They feel it. They take it on as their own. But over time, when they are repeatedly hurt, ignored, or gaslit, they develop something called empathic burnout. This isn't just emotional fatigue. It's a total collapse of their internal compass. The nervous system shifts from empathy to survival. The subconscious starts screaming, "Enough!" The cycle that breaks them. Let's walk through it. 1. They sense your emotional distress. They reach out. 2. You say, "I'm fine," but act cold. They feel responsible and try harder. 3. You withdraw. They chase closeness. You reject again. 4. They give more, hoping love will heal you. You take and take and take. This isn't love. It's emotional servitude disguised as compassion. And the empath keeps pouring from a cup that no one else bothers to fill. And still they stay. Why? Because empaths were often conditioned to believe love is earned through sacrifice. Many grew up in homes where they were the peacekeeper, the one who had to manage emotions that weren't theirs. They learned that being good equals being needed. So they tolerate things that would break other people, not because they're weak, but because pain feels familiar, predictable, safe, until it doesn't. The moment it all begins to change, it starts with silence. They stop explaining themselves. They stop reaching out first. They stop apologizing for how they feel. They begin to recognize the pattern. They are always the emotional caretaker, and the other person, the emotional taker. And this realization is not a spark. It's a wildfire. Carl Jung would say, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. The empath's breaking point is when they stop protecting others from the truth of their own behavior. They stop absorbing pain that isn't theirs. They stop minimizing their own hurt. They stop excusing patterns that drain them. And that shift, it's not passive. It's not bitter. It's sacred. What it looks like on the outside. They'll still be polite, still soft-spoken, still the same smile. But the energy, it's different. They stop reacting. Your guilt trips don't work. Your silent treatments feel like relief. They no longer bend to avoid conflict. They no longer fear your silence. They no longer wait for you to care, because they've finally accepted something brutal. They were never seen, only used, and so they go quiet. Not because they have nothing to say, but because they finally know you wouldn't listen anyway. Not to understand, only to defend, only to twist, only to maintain control. So they retreat inward, not into pain, but into peace. A peace you don't recognize, because it's the kind of peace that doesn't need permission. The dangers shift. They are no longer trying to fix things. They are no longer hoping you'll change. They are no longer fantasizing about what could be, because now they are witnessing something far more important. Who they become when they finally stop caring. And this version of them, she doesn't beg, he doesn't chase. They don't entertain breadcrumbs, because once an empath reclaims their power, they become unreachable to anyone who once fed on their light. You didn't lose them when they got angry. You lost them when they went silent. The psychological shift. What happens when the empath detaches emotionally? There's a strange kind of silence that follows emotional exhaustion. It doesn't beg. It doesn't scream. It simply lets go. You don't even realize it's happening at first. You still go through the motions. You smile, you nod, you reply, but inside, something sacred has shifted. You're no longer emotionally available to the person who once had access to all of you. And that's when the real danger begins. Not for you, but for the one who thought they could keep breaking you without consequence. What happens when the empath detaches? Let's be clear, an empath who detaches isn't turning cold. They're turning inward. They begin to reclaim every piece of themselves. They hand it out like free medicine. All the compassion, all the time, all the second chances. They start gathering those fragments, like sacred relics, and placing them gently back where they belong. Inside, this is not emotional withdrawal. This is self-resurrection, the internal rebuilding process. According to trauma psychology, when someone detaches after chronic emotional neglect, they enter a phase of self-integration. This means the inner child, the one who was always trying to fix, rescue, or prove their worth, finally feels safe enough to stop. You stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop over-functioning in relationships that only survive because of your effort. You stop waiting for someone to validate your pain. Instead, you do something far more radical. You start listening to yourself. Jungian insight, withdrawal as conscious individuation. Carl Jung described individuation as the process of becoming whole. When an empath detaches, they begin this sacred journey. They confront their own shadow, the parts of them that stayed in harmful dynamics, because they feared being abandoned, feared being unloved, feared being too much. But as they sit in the stillness, something shifts. They realize they were never too much. They were just too real for someone who wasn't ready to face their own emptiness. What the other person experiences. Let's shift perspectives. When someone is used to your emotional labor, your withdrawal hits harder than confrontation, because anger gives them something to fight against. Silence, it gives them nothing. It mirrors their behavior back to them. And most people can't survive their own reflection. They may lash out, blame you, accuse you of changing, call you cold, but beneath their words is a growing awareness. I pushed them too far. The collapse of control. They no longer know how to manage you, because your emotional detachment breaks the feedback loop they were using to control the dynamic. If they pulled away, you used to chase. If they acted cold, you overcompensated. If they ignored you, you made excuses for them. But now, they pull away, and you don't follow. They go silent, and you find peace. They test you, and get indifference. That's the danger. You stop playing the game. They no longer have access. This is what makes an awakened empath so dangerous. You still feel, but now you filter. You no longer absorb everyone's pain as your own. You no longer rescue people from the consequences of their choices. You no longer confuse love with self-erasure. You let people sit in their discomfort. You let the narcissist feel the weight of their own loneliness. You let the emotionally unavailable taste the silence they created. And that, more than any outburst, that is what shakes them. Emotional neutrality, not cold, just clear. You stop reacting emotionally to manipulation. Gaslighting attempts fall flat. Passive-aggressive comments go unanswered. Emotional baiting becomes obvious, and you don't need to prove anything anymore. You simply let people show who they are and respond accordingly. A different kind of power. This isn't revenge. This isn't spite. This is evolution. Because true power isn't about control. It's about emotional sovereignty. And the person who once held your emotional strings now finds they are grasping air because you've cut the cord. They'll notice, but not in the way you think. They'll feel your absence, not just physically, but emotionally, energetically, spiritually. They'll revisit old messages. They'll test your boundaries. They'll circle back with guilt-laced apologies, breadcrumb conversations, vague nostalgia. But you've changed, not because they hurt you, but because you healed. They expected you to break. Instead, you awakened. The silent power shift. What happens when the empath stops explaining and starts living? You used to narrate your pain. Carefully, gently, patiently. You tried to make them understand. You spelled it out, over and over again. Not because you were weak, but because you believed that if they only knew how badly it hurt, they would stop hurting you. But they didn't, because they never had to. Now you've stopped explaining. And that silence, it's not empty, it's electric. It's the sound of boundaries forming, self-respect solidifying, identity rising. You're no longer available for conversations that only serve to gaslight. You're no longer trapped in circles that go nowhere. You've learned that someone who truly loves you won't need an essay to treat you right. You're not cold, you're clear. Psychological concept, cognitive closure. In psychology, people chase closure because the mind craves resolution. But here's the truth. Some people don't need more information. They need more accountability. And when you stop giving them access to your emotional data, they lose the ability to control the narrative. You've stopped inviting them into your healing. You've stopped auditioning for their compassion. And now they're outside of the story, looking in. And that shift, it terrifies them. The change they can't handle. They may still test you. They may say, "You've changed. You're not the same person I met. You used to be softer." But what they really mean is, you're no longer easy to manipulate. They're not missing you. They're missing the version of you who tolerated their inconsistency. They're missing the access, not the intimacy. Jungian psychology, the withdrawal of the projection. Carl Jung believed we often project parts of ourselves onto others, especially in relationships. In this case, the narcissist or emotional manipulator projected their need for control, validation, and emotional avoidance onto the empath. But once you pull back, you take that projection with you. You remove the mirror. Now they're left with their own reflection. And what they see isn't pretty, because for the first time, there's no one left to blame. The energy shift they can't replicate. They try to move on. They seek someone else, someone less difficult, someone easier. But they don't realize what they're really searching for isn't love. It's the emotional safety you provided while slowly unraveling yourself. And no one else does that, because no one else will let themselves be dismantled just to make someone else feel whole. So they keep searching, keep reaching, keep running in emotional circles, because they don't want healing. They want supply, and you've stopped being available for it. The empath turns inward and becomes whole. You start doing things without thinking of them. You stop waiting for the text. You make decisions without wondering how they'll react. You wake up, and the first thing on your mind is you. You start listening to your own needs, your own voice, your own pain. Not because you've stopped caring altogether, but because you've finally started caring about yourself more. This isn't selfish. It's sacred. You start building a life that doesn't include them. You go to places that make you feel alive. You pick up old hobbies. You laugh, truly laugh, without looking over your shoulder. You re-meet yourself in the quiet you were once so afraid of. And the more you do, the more you wonder why you ever begged someone to stay in a space they never respected. They try to come back but can't reach you. Maybe it's a text, a DM, a "Hey stranger," a meme they send late at night, hoping you'll bite. But this time, you don't feel the pull. You don't feel the need to respond, to explain, to revisit the grave of something that already died. Because you're not mad. You're just done. What they feel but won't admit: regret, shame, loss, panic. But here's the twist. They're not sorry for what they did. They're sorry they can't get away with it anymore. They didn't lose someone who needed them. They lost someone who chose them. And once an empath awakens to that truth, they never unsee it. The most dangerous kind of love is the kind that doesn't need to be returned to feel real. But the most dangerous kind of person is the one who finally chooses themselves. The final transformation. When you choose yourself, everything changes. The most dangerous moment isn't when the empath cries, or when they rage, or even when they walk away. It's when they wake up and realize they don't need anyone to be whole. That's the moment they stop seeking closure, stop replaying conversations, stop romanticizing potential, stop trying to be understood. They don't need to be understood anymore because they've finally understood themselves. The psychology of self-return. This isn't some performative detachment. This isn't pretending not to care. This is the integration of truth, the moment when every lie they internalized about their worth loses power. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. You're being dramatic. No one else would tolerate you. These were never reflections of who they are. They were projections of someone else's inability to feel. And now, they don't shrink from those words anymore. They outgrow them. Carl Jung called this the union of opposites, the light and the shadow, the soft and the powerful, the wounded and the wise. When the empath stops abandoning themselves for the comfort of others, they become something entirely new, a whole person, not a fixer, not a feeler, not a wounded child, not a caregiver to the emotionally unavailable, but a sovereign, self-respecting soul who no longer confuses intensity with intimacy. What this looks like in real life. You take back your mornings. You take back your peace. You take back your decision-making. You begin to date again. But this time, you're not looking for someone to save. You're looking for someone who meets you. You're no longer attracted to the roller coaster. You crave emotional safety, stability, presence. You crave what you used to give away so easily. You create boundaries that don't apologize. You say no with grace. You stop explaining your value. You stop over-explaining anything at all. If someone doesn't respect your space, they lose access, not because you're punishing them, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself to avoid being abandoned by them. You no longer entertain the return of chaos, because it will try to return. They'll show up again. I miss you. No one gets me like you do. You were the best thing that ever happened to me. But now you hear these words with different ears. You feel their weight instead of their pull. And deep down, you know, they missed a version of you who didn't know better. You finally feel safe inside your own life. You make peace with the silence. You find joy in your solitude. You stop apologizing for your standards. You realize that love doesn't have to feel like confusion. It doesn't have to feel like sacrifice. It doesn't have to come at the cost of your peace. You start walking through life as if you deserve to be loved deeply because you finally believe it. And what happens then? You stop attracting chaos. You stop tolerating breadcrumbs. You stop making room for people who only show up when they're lonely. The empath's final evolution. You're still kind, still warm, still capable of depth and compassion. But now it's filtered, directed, protected. You love from a full cup. You don't pour into black holes. You stop giving oxygen to fires that only existed to burn you. And the world, it senses the shift. People speak to you differently. You stop over-explaining. You take up space. You walk into a room like someone who belongs, because you do. And if they ever watch you again, if they ever come across your name, your voice, your light, they'll feel something they never expected. Regret that isn't loud, but lifelong, because you didn't just walk away. You walked into yourself, and that's something they'll never again be invited into. You weren't called. You were healing. You weren't lost. You were buried. And now, you're becoming everything they tried to convince you you weren't. If you've stopped chasing, if you've reclaimed your power, if you've finally stopped caring the way you used to, comment below and share your story. You're not alone. Someone else needs your voice. Subscribe for more psychologically deep, emotionally rich content. Share this with someone who's learning to choose themselves.